All right, Shalom Aleichem, everybody. This is Rabbi Sayani, Rabbi Daniel Sayani. And this is a shir on the topic of Ayin Hara, on the topic of the evil eye. Um, and we'll look at it in terms of where this appears in our parsha this week, Tisa. Um, so this is a concept that I think many of us are sort of familiar with on the basis of vernacular religion. It's kind of a folk, or something that at least we do attribute to sort of vernacular religion, folk religion. Um, something that we might look at as really being rather irrational, but we'll explore to see where there actually is a basis for this belief and where it comes from in our parsha. So, is this something real, or is it Baba Mises? Is it superstition? So, let's look towards the beginning of our parsha, the beginning of Parshat Kitisa. Um, the opening verses of this parsha were what we read on Shabbos Shkolim, right? The one of the two Shabbosim preceding Purim, right? And if we remember, we look back a couple of weeks, we see that the Torah warns against counting the Jewish people directly, and instead, the way a census was undertaken was through the counting, or really through the giving of the half shekel of the Machsita shekel, um, to avoid the danger of the Ayin Hara. So when Hashem instructs Moshe Rabbeinu to take a census, he tells him not to count the people directly. Instead, everybody was to give a half shekel. The coins would be counted, avoiding the danger of the Ayin Hara, the danger of the evil eye that could arise when people are counted by number. So the verse says, this is Pasuk Yud Beis in Perek Lamed, Shemos, chapter 30, verse 12. Ki Tisa Rosh Bnei Israel Livkudechem, Nanuish Kofer Nafsho, Lashem Bivkodotam, Velo Yeh Vachem Negev Bivkodotam. That when you take the sum of the children of Israel according to their numbers, let each one give to God an atonement for his soul when they're counted, then there will be no plague among them when they are counted. So why would there be a plague among the people when they're counted? So says Rashi, minyanam ledat kamahem, altinin lagulgolet, Ela yitnu kolechad machsita shekel v'timne et cheshkolim v'teda minyanam, shehaminyan sholet bo ayin hara ve'hadever ba'alehem, kemoshi matzinu v'imei David. Says Rashi, when you want to take a census to know how many people there are, don't count them directly by head. Instead, have each person give a half shekel. Count the coins and you'll know their number. Because a direct count brings the influence of the ayin hara, the evil eye, and a plague can come upon them, as we find happened in the days of David. So the warning not to count Jews directly because it can bring a plague was ignored in the time of David HaMelech, in the time of King David. It led to a devastating plague that struck the nation. So King David decided to conduct a complete census of Israel. He instructed his general Yoav to count every tribe from Dan in the north all the way to Beersheba in the south. Yoav tried dissuading David HaMelech, but he insisted. King David and the army officers spent nearly 10 months traveling across the land to record the numbers. So this story, this Maisa, is recorded in Shmuel Beis, Perek Chav Daled, 2 Samuel, chapter 24. Yosef of Hashem lachrov beYisrael vayaseh et David bahem lemor lech et Yisrael v'et Yehuda. What was the result? The anger of Hashem flared up against Israel. He incited David against them, saying, "Go and number Israel and Judah." Vayomer HaMelech el Yoav sar chayil asher ito shutna b'chol shiftei Yisrael v'dan ban Beersheba shiva ufikdu et ha'am ve'yadati et mispar ha'am. The king said to Yoav, his army commander, make the rounds of all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, take a census of the people, so that I may know the size of the population. Unsurprisingly, Yoav is frightened by David's sudden desire to conduct a census. He firmly wishes to dissuade him from going through with it. He says, Vayomer Yoav el HaMelech v'Yosef Hashem Elokecha el ויוסף השם אלוקיך אל העם ככם וככם 100 פעמים ועיני אדוני המלך ראות ואדוני המלך למה חפץ בדבר הזה. Yoav answers the king, may Hashem your God increase the number of the people 100-fold while your own eyes see it, but why should my lord, my king, want this? So as the story continues, David HaMelech ignores Yoav's warning and Yoav conducts the census. And once the census is over, David realizes that he made a very serious mistake. When the count was finally reported, over 1 million fighting men, David was struck with remorse. He confesses to God that he sins. ויחלב דוד אותו אחרי כן ספר את העם ויאמר דוד אל השם חטאתי מאוד אשר עשיתי ואת השם חבר נא את עוון עבדך כי נשכלתי מאוד. So afterward, he reproaches himself, David, for having numbered the people. David says to Hashem, I've sinned grievously in what I have done. Please, O God, remit the guilt of your servant, for I've acted foolishly. So then the prophet Gad delivers a message from Hashem, offering him a choice of 3 punishments. It could be years of famine, months of fleeing from enemies, or 3 days of plague. And David chose to fall into Hashem's hands rather than human hands, trusting in Hashem's mercy. Haloch, v'dibart el David ko amar Hashem, shalosh anochi notel lecha, bechar lecha achat mechem v'eseh lach. Go and speak unto David, thus says God, I lay upon thee 3 things, choose one of them that I may do it unto thee. Vayavo God el David vayaged lo vayomer lo chatavu lecha sheva shanim ra'ab b'artzecha im 3 chodashim nuscha lifnei zarecha v'chuvrotefecha v'im heyot 3 yamim dever b'artzecha ta da ure'eh ma'ashiv shalchi davar. So God came to David and told him and said unto him, shall 7 years of famine come unto you in your land, or will you flee 3 months before your foes while they pursue you, or shall there be 3 days pestilence? Now advise thee and consider what answer I shall return to him that sent me. Vayomer David el Gad zarli me'od nipla na ve'ad Hashem ki rabim rachamav ve'ad adam al polah. So that first part, we know that from Tachnun, right? Vayomer David el Gad zarli me'od. David says unto God, I'm in great straits. Let us now fall into the hands of God, for his mercies are great. Let me not fall into the hands of man. So, devastating plague sweeps the nation, killing 70,000 people until Hashem stops the angel poised to strike Yerushalayim, halting the angel at the threshing floor of Arona, the Yebusi, the Jebusite. Seeing the angel, David begged that the punishment fall on him alone. And then God told him to build a Mizbeach, to build an altar on that very spot, a place that would later become the site of the Beit HaMikdash. David goes to Araunah, who offered to give him the land and the animals for free. David refuses, insisting on paying, saying that he cannot offer to Hashem something that cost him nothing. And David builds the Mizbeach, he brings korbanos, brings sacrifices. Hashem answers his prayers, bringing the plague to an end. Practically, because of the concern that counting people directly can invite Ayin Hara, this is why the common custom, let's say, when we want to count for a minyan, we don't count Jews directly. But like when we need to see if we have 10 men for a minyan, instead we use numbers altogether, and we count using the words of the pasuk of the verse Hoshea es samecha vareches nahalasecha ureim v'yasemad ha'olam. Another case in the Torah where we see Ayin Hara at work is in the story of the birth of the Shvatim, of the tribe's birth. And the Mefarshim, the commentators, explain that Yaakov's wives, that the wives of Jacob, knew that he would have 12 sons. So each wife would fairly have 3. When Leah had her 4th son, she openly acknowledged that she had received more than her share, which made her vulnerable to the Ayin Hara, vulnerable to the evil eye. And as a result, she stopped having children for a time. So the Rabbeinu Bechaye on Bereshis, Parak Lamed, Pasuk Lamed Ches, chapter 30, verse 38 says, Latzinu beledet cheshvatim shebishvil davur echad shalea she'amrodeh et Hashem shenatna chuda'ah V'vein Revi al Shehikira She'nat La Yoter Machlaka Shalat Shalat Ba'ayin Hara Hu Shekatuv Miyad V'Ta'amod Mildat. We find in the birth of the Shvatim that because of one statement Leah made when she said, I will thank Hashem, offering gratitude upon the birth of her fourth son, and recognizing that she had received more than her share, the Ayin Hara took hold of her, which is why it says, immediately it says, the Tamod Mildat, that she stopped giving birth. So we see that the concept is at least understood in Torah times. Now, interestingly, going back at King David, looking back at the census, so what was the critical flaw in conducting that census? Was it really the census itself or the way in which the census was conducted? All right, so that's a whole other discussion. Rashi, of course, discusses this concern of Ayin Hara in our parsha. There are other, maybe more rational suggestions, like the Ralbag, for instance. Right, Gersonides, the Ralbag suggests that, that David counted his troops unnecessarily without a direct zivui, without a direct commandment from God. And thus he erred in entrusting human strength, rather than putting full faith in Hashem as Israel's defender. So, our pasuk in Shmuel base, the Ralbag there says, Bebatchel arov ha'am v'lo ha'yoroi she'yiftach ki im b'Hashem yitbarach levado. That really the mistake was that David erred in trusting the multitude of the people when he should have put his faith fully in Hashem. It seems like a forced and maybe rather apologetic interpretation, because in other places, David HaMelech counts his troops with no tzivui, with no divine command, and without there being such dire consequences. Anyhow, we'll look at some statements in Chazal, some Mamre Chazal that discuss the topic. So, Pirkei Avot, Parak Beit Mishna Tet, the second chapter, Pirkei Avot, the ninth Mishnah, quotes Rabbi Eliezer that an Ayin Hara, or really an Ayin Ra'ah, will be very deliberate, because there are differences between Ayin Ra and Ayin Hara. That definite article does have some interpretative, ramifications. So the Mishnah, though, quotes Rabbi Eliezer that an Ayin Ra is a trait that a person should stay away from. Amar lechem zeureu zochi derech yashar sheyidbak sheyidbak b'hadam. Rabbi Eliezer omer Ayin Tova. Rabbi Yeshua omer chavetov. Rabbi Yossi omer shachin tov. Rishon omer charoyet chanolad. Rabbi Elazar omer lev tov. Amar lechem roya niyat divrei Elazar ben arach midivrechem shebichlal davarav divrechem. Amar lechem zu uru zochi derech ra'ah sheyitrachek mimena ha'adam. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Ayin Ra'ah. Rabbi Yoshua Omer Chavera. Rabbi Yossi Omer Shochem Rav. Rabbi Shimon Omer Chalovi V'Eino Mishalem. Echad Chalovi Min Chadam Chalovi Min Hamakom Baruch Hu Shenemar Lo V'Rasha V'Lo Yeshalem V'Tzadik Chonem V'Notein. Rabbi Elazar Omer Levra Omer Lechem Roe Ani Divrei Elazar Ben Arach Midvrechem Shebichlad Devarav Divrechem. So the Mishnah here is discussing, sort of what is the right way to which a man should cleave. So Rabbi Yochanan says unto them, go forth and observe. What is the right way to which a person should cleave? Rabbi Elazar says a good eye, to have an Ayin Tov. Rabbi Yeshua says a good companion. Rabbi Yossi says a good neighbor. Rabbi Shimon says foresight. Right, Royas and Layla, to see things before they come to be. Rabbi Elazar says a good heart. Rabbi Yochanan says to them, I prefer the words of Elazar ben Arach, for in his words your words are included. And Rabbi Yochanan says to them, go forth and see which is the evil way the bad way which a man should shun. Rabbi Eliezer says an evil eye. An evil companion, says Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yossi says an evil neighbor. Rabbi Shimon says a person who borrows and doesn't pay does not repay, for he that borrows is as one who borrows from God. As it says in Tehillim, the wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous deal graciously and give. Rabbi Elazar says an evil heart, and Rabbi Yochanan says to him, I prefer the words of Elazar ben Arach, for in his words your words are included. So we see that an ayin ra, an evil eye, is something to avoid. What exactly does that mean? We'll see that later. Two Mishnayos later, we see that Rabbi Hoshua is quoted as saying that an ayin hara, it removes one from this world. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, ayin hara v'yetzer hara v'sinat chabriot motzi'in et chadam min ha'olam. Right, so you have an evil eye, the yetzer, the evil inclination, sinat chabriot, hatred of people. These are things that remove man from the world. So the Rambam has an interesting comment here. He says, Amar she'charitzut le'mamun v'rov hata'ava v'roa hanefesh v'chucholech hamara hashchora sheyavi chadam limos re'ut einav v'yisna'echu v'yitav lo chevrat chachayot v'chit bodedut b'midbarot uv'ya'arot v'yivchar lo makom she'enan meyushav v'zeh etzlam lo mitzad perusot Rak l'roa ta'avatam v'kinatam v'zulatam elu yamitu chadam v'lo safek ki yechila gufo v'yamut haramito. So the Rambam says that exuberance for money and much desire and badness of the soul, says that this is really it's a sickness of a black bile that brings a man to be disgusted to that which his eyes see, and he'll hate it. And he'll end up preferring the company of animals and isolation in the wilderness and in forests, and he'll choose an uninhabited place. And this is with them not because of asceticism, but rather because of the lack of desire and their jealousy of others. These are things that will kill a man. So the Rambam identifies Ayin Hara in a very rational way with sort of jealousy. And it comes from greed. And this will lead a person to get sick, and he'll die before his time. So the Mishna is saying that one of the things that exists, or one of the ways of life that we should avoid, is an ayin ra'ah. And two Mishnayos later, Rabbi Yeshua says that the ayin hara is something that removes a person from this world. So which person in this Mishnah is being referred to when it says ayin ra'ah motzin es hadam min ha'olam, it pulls a person out of the world? It's the person who has it. It's referring to the person who has the evil eye. Referring to the person who, like the Yetzer Hara, it's referring to the person who bears it. So the eye is coming out of where the vision is coming from, not where the vision is landing. So something about having an eye in Hara damages who? Says the Mishna, the person who has it. So whatever the ayin hara is, it's damaging for the person themselves who has it. And just another example of this, and note just actually in the previous mission, is that when Rabbi Eliezer presents what is sort of a derech ra'ah yirchak mimenu chadam, it's referring to the person bearing the ayin ra'ah, not the person who's receiving the ayin ra'ah. So the Mishnah does say that there is an ayin hara or an ayin ra'ah that actually does exist. We have an interesting Gemara, Maseches Brachos, Daf Chaf 20. It's a very interesting Gemara because it wouldn't pass muster by the way we understand sneas, by the way we understand modesty and boundaries nowadays. It says, Rav Gidel Chavari Gilda Chava Ka'azid Beyatev Asharei Ditfila. Amr Luchu Chachi Tvilu V'Chachi Tvilu. Amri Le Rabbanan Laka Nistafe Marmi Yetzer Hara. Amr Luchu Damian Be'apaki Kake Chiore. So the Gemara says that that Rav Gidal was accustomed to go and sit at the gates of the mikveh, the gates of where the women would tovel. And he says to them, immerse yourselves in this way and immerse yourselves in that way. And the sages said to him, Master, do you not fear the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara? You're seeing these naked women. And he says to them, in my eyes, they're comparable to white geese. Rabbi Yochanan Chavar Gilda Chava Ka'azel Ve'yati Vashreti Tefila Amar Ki Yisrael Kan Benot Yisrael Ve'atiyayin Mitfila Mistaklen Bi Ve'nehevi L'chu Zara De Shapire Kevoti Amri Le Rabbanan Lake Mistafe Bar Me'ena Bisha Amar L'chu Ana Mizar De Yosef Ka'atena Tela Shat Lebei Ena Bisha Dichti Ben Parat Yosef Ben Parat Ale Ayin Ve'amar Rabbi Avahu Al Tikri Ale Ayin Ela Ole Ayin. So similarly, the Gemara relates that Rabbi Yochanan was accustomed to go and sit at the gates of the mikveh, where the women would tovel. And Rabbi Yochanan, who was known for his very good looks, explained this and said, when the daughters of Israel come from their tefillah, they come from their immersion, they'll look at me and they'll have children as beautiful as I am. And the sages asked him, Rebbe, do you not fear the evil eye? And he says to them, I come from the seed of Yosef, over whom the evil eye has no dominion. Quoting the pasuk, Ben Parat Yosef, Ben Parat Aleayin, that Yosef is a bountiful vine on a spring. Aleayin, this is Bereshis, Perek Mem Tes, chapter 49, pasuk Chof Beis, verse 22. The word ayin can mean both spring or eye, like, the organ, the eye. And Rabbi Abahu says, he offers a drush, he says, don't read it ale ayin, but rather read it ole ayin, above the eye, because they transcend the influence of the ayin hara, the influence of the evil eye. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanin Amir Mechacha, V'yidgu l'rov b'kerev haaretz, brings another verse. We know this from Halacha go LOC, right? V'yidgu l'rov b'kerev haaretz, ma dagim shebayam mayim echsin alechem, ve'ein ayin hara sholatet bachem, absaro shel Yosef, ein ayin hara sholatet bachem. So Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina, he cites a different proof. This is from the bracha of Yaakov. Yaakov's bracha of Yosef's sons, Ephraim and Menashe. Right? Hamalacha go'eloti mikol ra. U'yivarechet chanarim. The angel who redeems me from all evil shall bless the young, and in them may my name be recalled, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Yitzhak. And may they multiply, the Yidgu, in the midst of the earth. So the word V'yidgu is related etymologically to the word fish, dag. Which is why there's such an emphasis in having fish on Shabbat and also fish on Rosh Hashanah, and other occasions. So just as the fish in the sea, water covers them, the evil eye has no dominion over them. And so too, the seed of Yosef, the seed of Joseph, the Jewish people, the evil eye has no dominion over them. And if you wish, say instead Yosef's eye, which did not seek to feast on that which was not his, Potiphar's wife, the evil eye has no dominion over him. So the Gemara brings a story about Rabbi Yochanan, who would sit outside of the mikveh, and when the women looked at him, they would bear good-looking children. And the Chachamim said to him, aren't you worried about the Ein Abisha, the evil eye, Ayin Hara? And he says, I'm a descendant of Yosef, who is not subject to Ayin Hara. And the Gemara brings two sources that the descendants of Yosef are not subject to the matter of evil eye, Ayin Hara. Right? Ben Parat Yosef, Ben Parat Ale Ayin, and V'yigul l'rov b'kerev haaretz. Beautiful, beautiful teachings that are said about the Jewish people, from Parshas Vayechi there. Now, the sages teach that there is a very particular sinister quality to this evil eye, that it could have a profound impact on a person's life. And Rav even reported that in his research, it was the cause of 99% of deaths. So the Gemara quotes a statement from Rav that 99 out of 100 people in the cemetery died from Ayin Ra. So it's a terrifying Gemara. It's in Bava Metziah Daf Kav Zayin Amud Beis 107b. Rav Salek Levei Kivrei Avad Meida Avad Amar Tishin V'Tisha Ba'ayin Ra'a Ve'echad B'derech Eretz. It says that Rav went to a cemetery, went to a graveyard. He used an incantation to determine how those buried there died. And he says 99 of them died by the evil eye and only one died by entirely natural causes. Very terrifying Gemara. So it says, "V'heisir Hashem mimcha kol chali," when Hashem says that Hashem will remove from you all sickness. Amarab zuayin, this is the eye. What does it mean that Hashem's going to remove from you all sickness? It's referring to the eye. Rav l'tamei de Rav Salik levei kivrei. So it goes to the local cemetery. Avad mai avad amar tishim v'tisha ba'ayin ra'av echad b'derech eretz. He had a spiritual awareness. He could go over to the graves, and he was able to declare that 99 people out of 100 had died as a function of ayin ra'ah, and only one naturally. Very terrifying. So it means to say that he was certain, Rav was certain that he understood that whatever the effects of this ayin ra'ah was, it was that it killed most people. Meaning to say that there's a natural person's cruising on a natural trajectory in life, something else interrupted it, which makes us start thinking, so how can you interrupt Hashem's plans? And this is what the Gemara tells us. We see in the Zohar brings Rav Shimon that when a person has an ayin ra, person has a destructive eye, and people should stay away from that person, just like they would stay away from the Melech HaMaves. So this is the Zohar in Parshas Noach Kuf Sadi Zayin, 197. V'hainu dekama Rav Shimon kol b'nei nogdei nebisha eina the dimchabla v'shar yodoi v'ichu mechabela de'alma yikre v'liboy le'inish le'istamra minei v'lo le'itkerva b'chadei v'lo yitazak v'asir le'mikrav b'adei v'itgalya ומשום כך מאיש רע עין באי להסתמרה מיני, יקמי מלך המוות הלך עד כמה וכמה. That every person who has an evil eye, he has upon him the eye of the angel of destruction, the Melech HaMaves, who is called the destroyer of the world. And a person has to guard himself from him, that he shouldn't come near him and not be harmed. So by avoiding him, one will be protected. It's forbidden to openly approach such a person, exposing ourselves to his evil eye. And if we must be aware or beware a person with the evil eye, so much more we have to beware the Melech HaMaves and hide ourselves on the day of the wrath of Hashem. Very, very terrifying that such a person is seen as very dangerous. Now, another example is seen in the Torah. This is in Parshas Pekudei. The verse there says in Shemos, Parak Lamed Ches Pasuk Chaf Ayin, Chaf Aleph rather, chapter 38, verse 21. Zeli Pekudei Mishkan Hedut Asher Pukad Al Pi Moshe Avodat Levim Beyad Itmar Ben Acharon HaKohen. These are the records of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle of the pact that were drawn up at the bidding of Moshe, the work of the Levium under the direction of Itamar, the son of Aaron HaKohen. So we count where it comes to all of the valuables that were collected to the Mishkan. So when you go through all these parshios, especially Pekudei, there's a large tally of what occurred or what they managed to raise. And so therefore the verse says, Eli Pekudei HaMishkan, that's how the Parsha Pekudei starts. These are the countings, meaning that there's a list and a tally of everything that was counted. we'll look at the Gur Aryeh. The Gur Aryeh is the Maharal's super commentary on Rashi. The Maharal of Prague, very famous for making the Golem. So the Gur Aryeh, the Maharal here says, "Ele pekudei mishkan mishkan shenit mashken shnei pamim chulei ve'im tomar uma inyano lechan lichtov zekan v'lama lo katav ze b'chol haparsha shekadma omnam devar ze hu mufla b'chochma v'ze yadua mima shenishtabru haluchot mipnei shenitnu bevim b'shalut bahem ayin hara מבני שכאן כתיב אלה פקודי המשכן שנמנו כל המשכן ומבני כך שלט בהם עין הרע שכל דבר שבמניין עין הרע שולט בו מבני שחיה מניין לכל דבר שבמשכן שלט עין הרע בזה וכן בית המקדש כל דבר שחיה במקדש היה בו מניין אשר נכתב בפירוש וכל מקום שיש מניין עין הרע שולט בו. So says the Gur Aryeh, these are the accounts of the Mishkan, the tabernacle that was taken as a pledge twice. So if you should say, what is the relevance to write this here? Why was this not written in the entire section that preceded? He says this is a matter that's wondrous in its wisdom. That it's known from the fact that the luchot, the tablets, were scattered because they were given publicly, and the Ayin Hara had power over them. So, from our Parsha Tisa, this idea is mentioned in the Medrash Tanchuma. So I'll bring the Medrash. This is the Medrash Tanchuma on Tisa Lamed Aleph. Medrash there says, "Rishon Vayechi Vayom Shlish Biot Haboker v'Cholei v'Chan v'Gam Ish Al Yerach Haluchot Rishonot Al Shenitnu B'Fumbei Lefichach Shalta B'Chem Ayin Chara v'Nishtabru v'Chan Amar Lo Kadosh Baruch Hu Ein Lecha Yafe Min Hatzniut." So, with reference to the first tablets, it's written that it came to pass on the third day when it was morning that there was thunder and lightning. But with regard to the second tablets, it said, "Don't let any man be seen." So the first tablets, because they were given in a very public way, the Medrash says that they were affected by the Ayin Hara. They ended up breaking. But here, when God gave the second set of luchot, the second set of tablets, he told Moshe that there's nothing more beautiful than doing things with modesty and with privacy. Right, so we put a very high, most cases at least, we certainly put a very high, value on that. And this comes from a Gemara. There's an idea that's said in the Gemara Masechet Ta'anit, Daf Chet Amud Beit 8b. It says, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, in a bracha Metziah Ela Bidvar Hasamui Min Ha'ayin, that a blessing rests only on something that's hidden from the eye. And this medrash is an application of that idea. Right, so the contrast between the first and the second tablets. The first set was shattered, and Moshe needed to carve new tablets to replace them. And the Medrash teaches that the first tablets failed to endure precisely because they were given openly. Their public nature drew the evil eye and led to their destruction. Being mindful not to flaunt blessings is something that certainly can help perhaps shield us from the effects of the Ayin Hara of the evil eye. Keeping good things discreet. The way we speak, the prayers we say, the mitzvahs we take on, they all serve as protection, certainly. in everyday practice, very commonly we say bli ayin hara whenever we share good news or something that might stir jealousy. And a further application of this, the Chida, Rav Chaim Yosef David Azulai, the Chida in Avodas HaKodesh Sipur and Shamir, Kaf Ayin Base 172, he adds that whenever we praise someone, we should also give them a bracha, ensuring that our words don't unintentionally invite the evil eye. Also says the Chida. He says, "Hamasapa sheva chadam b'chochmo asher o banim v'chayotze chayev levarcho shelo yishlo ba'ayin hara." Says the Meiri, says the Chida rather. That a person who praises somebody else for their wisdom, their wealth, their children, or similar qualities, they're obligated to give them a bracha, to give them a blessing, so that the evil eye shouldn't have any power over them. So because the Maharal, going back to the Maharal, he says that because it is here written that all of the tabernacle was counted, they counted everything in the Mishkan. The Ayin Hara had power over them, because anything that's counted, the evil eye will have power over it, which we saw from Rashi on our Parsha Tisa regarding the census. And because there was a count for everything in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan, the Ayin Hara had power over it. And likewise in the Beit HaMikdash, that everything that was in the Beit HaMikdash, it had a count, as it's written explicitly. In every place where there's counting, the Ayin Hara will have power over it. So because something is public, it had the Ayin Hara that affected it. Right, the second Luchot, by the second Luchot, you didn't have the whole Ma'amad Sinai, right? You didn't have the whole fanfare. You didn't have the whole publicity. You didn't have people. There wasn't the people seeing and hearing what, people seeing the heard and hearing the soul, that which was seen. You didn't have the whole fanfare. It was on Yom Kippur, right? Moses goes up 40 days, 40 nights. He gets the second set of tablets on Yom Kippur. He writes them himself, and he comes down, and we don't know so much about that day. So that's the Luchot that ultimately survived. And the ones that were public, says the Tanchuma, and brings the Maharal, those were the ones that was destroyed. So he's saying that Ayin Hara, it's that deep. That even the Mishkan was susceptible to Ayin Hara because it was counted. Right, ומבני שכאן כתיב אלה פקודי המשכן שנמנו כל המשכן, מפני כך שלט בהם עין הרע שכל דבר שממון עין הרע שלט בו. We think about this, it's an interesting thing. We think about the tabernacle. We think Eli Pekudei, how wonderful. Look what they managed to do. There was a remarkable fundraising effort, and all the, we read about all the design and all of the artisanship and everything that went into this. In a few days' time, they had what they wanted. They got beyond their quota. It only happened once in history. It's a very unbelievable thing. And the Gur Aryeh, gives us sort of a change in perception on this, saying that, you think about the Mishkan, it had a limited time, right? It was destroyed at Shiloh at the times of Shmuel Aleph, at the very beginning of First Samuel. It ended up being destroyed. So what we see over here, says the Gur Aryeh, is that you have to be very careful, because numbering something, in fact, opens the door to what this concept of Ayin Hara is. So interestingly, in this Maharal, you see two things: publicity and numbering, two different examples. We don't know what this is yet, but the point is, if anybody were to say to you that Ayin Hara doesn't exist, Um, we see examples of it embedded in the Torah itself. Um, Torah warning us not to count people. Here, the Maharal is adding this aspect of what about counting things, right? So the Torah itself doesn't mention anything about not counting for the Mishkan. It doesn't mention that the Ayin Hara can land on the Mishkan, and moreover, the Mishkan lasted for 400 years. It's a pretty good time for anything or anybody to survive the Ayin Hara. No person has certainly survived the Ayin Hara for 400 years. Um, so the Mishkan ultimately was not meant to be an infinite structure. It was meant to be something temporary leading to the temple. And the Gur Aryeh goes on to say that the Beit HaMikdash was also subject to Ayin Hara because of the countings in the time of Shlomo HaMelech, in the time of King Solomon. But it wasn't meant to be. That's one of the stories why David HaMelech did not build the Mishkan. There are numerous midrashim of the potential what could have been. The story was that if David had built it, it would have lasted forever, which means to say that there was potential. Obviously, we can't second guess history, right? It's very hard to know what could have been. And from a relative perspective, 400, or in the case of the Mishkan, 369 was the time in Shiloh. It's a long time for the Mishkan to exist, but it's hard to know what could have been as well. But we take it from the Gur Aryeh here, based on the Tanhuma, that nonetheless it's not just about counting, but public counting seems to be the concern over here. That there's a lot to be concerned about, and the question is why and what is already the nature of this. I think when we understand the nature of it, we could appreciate more fully what's going on. So, to consider a practical halachic example, the concept of chesek re'iyah. Can we damage? Is there a concept of damaging through looking? So the concept of ayin hara is taken so seriously that it does have an impact on halacha. And the Gemara says that a person shouldn't stand and stare at somebody else's field, because doing so can invoke the ayin hara and potentially harm the crops. So Bava Metziah, Daf Kav Zayin Amud Aleph 107a, Amar Le, Rav Yehuda, the Bar Rav Nachman, Rabbi Nachi, Ladzibanar Smicha Lamata, the Amar Rabbi Avahu, Amar Rav Hun, Amar Rav, Asur Lo Ladam Sheyamod Al Ste Chavera B'Shashi Omedet B'Kamotecha. Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Rav Nachman, Rabbi, my brother, do not buy land that is near a town. As Rav Avahu says, that Rav Huna says, that Rav says, because it's prohibited for a person to stand by another's field when the ripe grain is standing, that is, when the produce is ready for harvest, as he might harm the produce with the ayin hara, with the evil eye. And similarly, land near a town may be harmed by the people of the town watching it. So Rashi here says, Lo tizbon, lo takanas sadecha smuchad la'ir she'ein b'nei adam sholetet batamid. Do not buy. It means do not buy a field adjacent to the city, where people's eyes constantly have dominion over it. Asur la'adam chulei shelo yafsidena ba'ayin hara. It is forbidden for a person, so that he should not cause it to be lost through the evil eye. So he says, look, I'm giving you advice. Don't buy property that's close to the city. Um, you know, it's forbidden for a person to stand next to another person's property as the grain is ripening. You're not allowed to watch and stand by someone else's field as the grain is ripening, which also means, sort of in common terms, you're not supposed to spend so much time looking into another person's business. You're not supposed to spend so much time eyeing another person's success, because in those days, good agriculture was equivalent to good success, right? In the second parsha of the Kriya Shema, it might be the second paragraph of the Shema, it talks about schar vonesh, reward and punishment, in terms of agriculture, because that was an agrarian world. Success then wasn't measured in 401k. It was measured in agricultural success and what the land gave you. So practically this means to say in any form, don't spend time watching other people's fields, because you might just destroy it with the Ayin Hara, with your Ayin Hara. So there are two recommendations of action in this Gemara. One is, just don't buy the land. So the Gemara says it's usher, it's forbidden to watch somebody else's field. But to take it a little further, the advice was given, therefore don't buy land in such a place. It's a very interesting sort of symbiotic relationship, right? It's forbidden for you to watch somebody else's property, but also just don't buy property in a place that other people might watch. You don't want to tempt fate. You don't want to put yourself in a situation that'll, make you vulnerable or invite trouble, even though it's usher for them, forbidden for them. So the Gemara is giving us a prohibition of gazing, but also it's telling us, don't risk being victimized. Don't allow yourself to be victimized, even though it's forbidden for the person to victimize you through the Ayin Hara. Right? It's a bit of common sense that we should all keep in mind. It's obviously terrible when people do bad things to us, but we also need to have the seichel, the intelligence, and to be proactive against putting ourselves in situations where we are making ourselves more vulnerable to being victimized. And this isn't just stories, it's actually codified in Shulchan Aruch. In Choshen Mishpat Simin Shin Ayin Chet, Seif 378.5, CE5, says, Afilu bebriatim yesh bo chesek lechavero asur listakel bo b'chikak asur le'adam sheyamod al stei chavero b'shad she'omedet b'kometecha. That even looking, if damage results to his friend from his looking, is forbidden. And so it's therefore forbidden for a person to stare at the field of his friend when it is standing full of crops. The Sma there says that the act of viewing itself will bring damage to the Nazir's crop, Chesek Riyah. The very beginning of Bava Basra, Daf Beis Amud Beis, the concept of Chesek Riyah is explicitly mentioned. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Chun Amar Rav, Asr La'adam Lamod B'stei Chavera B'shah Shehi Omedet B'kamotecha. Rashi, Shalo Yazikena Ba'ayin Ra'ah. Rav Abba says, Rav Huna says that Rav says it's forbidden for somebody to stand in another person's field and to look at his crops while the grain is standing because it casts an evil eye upon it. That can cause damage. And the same rule would apply to a garden. Person is not allowed to spend time watching another person's field as the grain is ripening. And these first two chapters in Bava Basra have a lot to do with sort of zoning laws, right? Discusses there, can you make a lot of noise in your property? Can you have a property that has a malodorous stench coming from it, right? All things you're doing in your own property, but that affect your neighbors. So the first Mishna in Bava Basra talks about when you have two neighbors that buy a common yard, they need to build a wall in the middle, right? There's a discussion who has to contribute towards the funds of the wall in between. And the Gemara uses about 4 amos. The Gemara talks about up to 4 amot. The wall needs to be, and there's a very fascinating halacha needs to be shared. A very fascinating halacha. The beginning of Bava Basra. Why do you need such a wall? Why do we realize that good walls make good neighbors? It's a notion called hezek riyah, the damage of seeing. And there's a machlokus, there's a dispute of whether hezek riyah shema hezek or lo shema hezek, whether we say that it causes damage or it does not cause damage. If damage results Uvenim ze noten tefach umechitza v'ze noten tefach umechitza. Lefichach im nafal hakotel makom v'ha'avanim shel shneim. So the Mishna there says, you have partners who wanted to make a partition, a mechitza, in a jointly owned courtyard. They build the wall for the partition in the middle of the courtyard. What is the wall made from? In a place where it's customary to build such a wall with non-chiseled stone gavil or chiseled stone gazit, or small bricks, kafisin, or large bricks, the vengim, they have to build a wall with that material. And everything is in accordance with the local, with the minhag hamakom, the regional custom. If they build the wall with non-chiseled stone, this partner provides 3 handbreadths of his portion of the courtyard. And that partner provides 3 handbreadths, since the thickness of such a wall is 6 handbreadths. If they build the wall with chiseled stone, this partner provides 2.5 handbreadths. That partner gives 2.5, since such a wall is 5 handbreadths thick. If they build the wall with small bricks, this one provides 2 handbreadths, that one provides 2 handbreadths, since the thickness of such a wall is 4 handbreadths. If they build with large bricks, this one provides 1.5 handbreadths, that one provides 1.5 handbreadths, since the thickness of such a wall is 3 handbreadths. So therefore, if the wall later falls, the assumption is that the space where the wall stood and the stones belong to both of them to be divided equally. Now, we see that this concept of seeing by damaging occurs. That staring at somebody's field could invoke an ayin hara, harm the crops, and so forth. We see that this is a concept with real halachic ramifications. So, what's an example of actually how this works in practicality? What does it mean? So, the Chiddushei Rambam, Bava Basra Daf Nun Tes Samad Aleph, the Rambam there says, "V'hu adin v'chol shekain behezek riyah, v'niskei adam adam hu mishum ayin ra'u mishum lishana bisha, mishum zniusa." That the same law applies, and all the more so regarding damage caused by sight, because it is damage of a person against a person, whether because of the ayin hara, whether because of evil eye, whether because of evil speech, or whether because of modesty. So these are the options that the Rambam gives us to what Hezekriya means. Right? One of those valid options, the Rambam says, is halachically speaking, why the laws of zoning exist in terms of the contributions to making a fence between neighbors due to ayin hara, meaning that ayin hara is one of the halachic underpinnings of one of these laws of zoning, says the Rambam. Now, this may sound superstitious, mystical, but we'll see that perhaps this is something that's more psychologically based, that the ayin hara can influence reality because our thoughts have the power to shape reality, or our thoughts have the power to shape what that means. So Rabbeinu Yonah, and it's interesting, these are sort of very psychological concepts that I think indicate that really there was such a Jewish influence on what we know about psychology, but also that Chazal and Rishonim, they had such a tremendous psychological acumen. The fact that, reality is ultimately shaped by perception, or that whatever we look at is influenced by the energy created by perception, and that such energy could have a very real and tangible impact on the world, is a very powerful thing. So Rabbeinu Yonah, very important source. Rabbeinu Yonah on Avot, on Mishna Yud Aleph. So Rabbi Yeshua Omer Ayin Hara, right? Rabbi Yeshua says the evil eye. And Rabbeinu Yonah says, Perish mi she'enu samech behelko vayin et chavero ha'ashir mimenu matai yaser osher gadol kamochu v'hu gorem ra la'atzmo v'chavero kasher amru chachmei teva mikol asher l'reich u'avir olei mincha machshava v'hu v'soref et הדברים שוהים בהם בעיניו הרע. גם בקרבו יש שרף אחר שמתאבד לדברים שאין יכולת מצוי בידו לעשות המחשבה הכי וכל גופו כי יתקצר רוחו ומציאתו מן העולם וזכו עין הרע שאמר רבי יהושע ראיה לזך פירוש על שאמר בכאן עין הרע בלשון זכר שזכו חיין ברע ולמעלה אמר עין אשפרש על מידתך הקילות שלא כדברי מקצת המפרשים ויצר חרה ושנאתך בריות משמען מוצאינתך דם מן העולם. So the explanation, says Rabbeinu Yonah Vayin Haraviv is like this. It's one who is not happy with their lot in life. He places his eye on his fellow who's wealthier than he, thinking, when will I be as wealthy as the great wealth of this man? And this causes evil to himself and to his fellow. It is like the wise men of science say about everything that is his neighbor's. That vapor comes up from that thought, it burns the things that he put his eye towards with an evil eye. And it's affecting you. He also burns himself inside. Since he desires things, the thought of which he does not have, the ability in his hand to materialize this, he destroys his body as he shortens his spirit and removes it from the world. And this is the evil eye about which Rabbi Yehoshua spoke. And proof of this explanation, Rabbeinu Yonah says, is that here he said the evil eye Ra in the masculine, which is the one that put his eye to something for evil. To Mishnayos above in tests, it said evil eye in the feminine, Ra'ah. Not Ra, but Ra'ah, the explanation of which is about the shade of stinginess. And it is not like the words of some of the commentators. The evil inclination, hatred of people, like the simple meaning, remove a person from the world. So, for Rabbeinu Yonah, it's a very remarkable explanation. That unless a person is not sufficiently happy with where they exist in life, he looks at his neighbor who's richer than him and says, you know, when is it going to be that I'm successful? I put all my ducks in line. I've done everything I need to do, right? Let's say a person, they went to the same school. They've been childhood friends. When am I going to be just like him? So number one, says Rabbeinu Yonah, what do? You cause evil to yourself because you spend your whole life comparing yourself to others. You're sitting there brooding, consuming yourself, expending energy by mulling over how much you could be and how many opportunities were lost to you and how unfortunate your life was. So he says you're hurting yourself by sitting there. And regarding one's friend, the person you're looking at, says the Chachmei Teva, you know, those, it sounds like scientists will tell you, you know, it sounds like that by looking at somebody else's property, there's almost something emitted into the air that burns their property, which sounds like by looking at them, something is emitted, you know, that is destructive. Is this like laser eyes, like Superman? What does he mean here by this? Gam kibo yisarfach achar shemita ve'ledvarim shein yacholet matzu beyado lasot hamachshava he mechalchelet gufo. He says, goes back to the person. The effects on a person, it's going to actually affect a person because if you're sitting there the whole time consumed by what other people are doing, you're actually just hurting yourself. You're burning yourself up. And all that energy spent based on thinking about everybody else luckier than you, that's lost energy in life, right? You're no longer operating on optimum because a lot of your energy is spent thinking about how unfortunate you are compared to others. When a person looks at what belongs to somebody else with jealousy, you know, a kind of energy rises from that thought. It harms the very things that he casts his negative eye upon. And the same is true within the person himself. When somebody craves things he cannot have, that desire damages him physically. It drains his spirit, it shortens his life. And this is the essence of the evil eye. So Rabbeinu Yonah teaches that the evil eye doesn't only harm the person being looked at, it harms the person who feels the jealousy as well. It's almost what we say about hatred or holding a grudge. It harms you more than the person that you're directing the hatred towards. When somebody obsesses over what they don't have, that jealousy drains their energy, it diminishes their quality of life. And it's a very simple and powerful message that when you direct negativity towards others, you're ultimately harming yourself as well. And that is the difference between Ayin Ra and Ayin Hara, right? The first Mishna is dealing with somebody who's stingy with the Ayin Ra. But Ayin Hara is the idea that somebody looks at his friend's lot and asks himself, when can he have what I have? Or when can I have what he has? When can I be as rich? It has a destructive effect on the friend, which Rabbeinu Yonah doesn't go into detail to explain. It's self-destructive because it causes stress and anxiety to the individual. And the idea that it's really sort of the thoughts or the feelings or the energies that we put into the universe that fuel this, it's an idea that the Mittler Rebbe in Toras Chaim explains. The Mittler Rebbe explains that the energy of the evil eye, it doesn't come from the physical eye itself, because the eye is simply an organ. It can't harm anybody on its own. Instead, the effect comes from a person's mind. It comes from thoughts and intentions. When somebody looks at another with jealousy, resentment, or negativity, their intellect directs how they perceive that person. And this mental perception is called the eye of the intellect. In other words, the way we see and judge others is shaped by our mind. And if the mind views somebody negatively, this perception can create a real tangible effect on that person. So the harm of the evil eye is not a physical force coming from the eye, but it's rather a spiritual or an intellectual force arising from negative thoughts and attitudes. Says the Mittler Rebbe, this is in Toras Chaim, Toras Chaim Bereshis Chaf Yudalad Aleph 114a. Mittler Rebbe there says as follows. It says, Ian Re'iyah vehistaklud zot efshar lomish zechu Re'iyah vehistaklud ha'ayin hagashmi. Lo yesh b'chaya chayin hagashmi lirot l'tov o l'ra acher she'ein seichel v'tam v'chakshamat ha'ayin b'riyah gashmit. Elu b'chreach sarich lomish zechu b'cho Re'iyah ruchanit shal chesechel shenikra ein chesechel Re'iyah Sechi mama sheroa b'sechel v'tam nischuto l'chavach אם כן, מה שרואה את הדבר לטוב זכו רק מחמת חיית שכל וסברה, שדם בשכל לטוב ומה שרואה את הדבר לרע, זכו רק מצד הטיית אורח השכל שמבין אותו לרע. That this matter of seeing and contemplating, it can't be understood as the physical eye's perception, because after all, what power does the physical eye have to truly see something as good or bad if there's no intellect or understanding in the act of seeing? It's just a physical sense. I think nowadays with, the psychology of perception, cognitive psychology, we know that that might not be exactly true, but nonetheless, the point stands is that seeing, just the physical action of a sense on itself is physical, right? There's no intellect or understanding in that act. So instead, it must be said that this refers to the spiritual vision of the intellect called the eye of the intellect, a true intellectual vision that perceives through understanding and discernment, recognizing something as meritorious or blameworthy. When one perceives something as good, it is only from the perspective of the intellect directing its judgment and reasoning to see it as good. Similarly, when perceiving something as bad, it is from the intellect shining its light to understand it as bad. So we usually assume that only our actions matter because we can see how actions directly affect the world. But in reality, our thoughts and perceptions also have tremendous impact, even if we're not aware of it. Every thought we have and every word we say, even if we don't act on them, influences reality. Sometimes the effect is physical and sometimes it's spiritual, but either way, the impact on another person is real. The destructive impact of this, the Maharal elsewhere in Nesivos Olam explains this. So the Maharal explains that the Ayin Hara, it's like a burning fire. a destructive power inherent in nature, spiritual rather than a physical force, where sort of celestial attention is drawn to the good fortune of the object of the Ayin Hara, and prompts a heavenly review of that individual's standing to determine whether he's actually deserving of such a good fortune. So in Nesivos Olam, Nesiv Ayin Tov Parak Aleph, the Maharal says, "V'yesh lecha l'dat ki arba yisodochem ba'olam uvachem cholam nochek b'seder shelo al yadam gam ken yotzei ha'olam min hashovi u'mekabel chadam chit pa'alut v'chu chacholi u'mi shesover v'chisir Hashem mimecha kol chaliz ayin hara yadua ki ayin hara yesh b'koich hashisaref u'mekabel chadam chizek Min hamasik asher yesh lo koach ashisaref ki ha'ayin hazeh saref kemo ha'esha hu saref. Says, and you should know that there are four elements in the world, and through them the world conducts itself in its order, and through them as well the world departs from equilibrium and a person receives an effect, and that is illness. And one who explains, and Hashem should remove from you every sickness, is referring to the evil eye. It's known that the evil eye, the Ayin Hara, possesses a fiery burning power, and a person receives harm from the one who causes damage, who has a fiery burning power, for that eye burns like fire, which burns. So the Maharal here, he understands the Ayin Hara as being a natural force which through the human eye can focus a type of burning energy to inflict tremendous damage on a person or an object. So the Gemara that we have in Bava Basra, the Chazon Ish takes that at face value. There are mentions in Chazal where a person insults a person of a highly spiritual nature, or they insult somebody on a high spiritual level, somebody of a high spiritual stature. They looked at them and they turned into a pile of bones, a gal shal atzamot. Whether that means literally they were incinerated, it's not clear, but nonetheless, it seems that there is a power. So, what does this really mean? The Chazon Ish says, take it as it means. So, this is Chazon Ish, Choshen Mishpat L'kudim Chaf Aleph, L'daf Yud Aleph, says, Sezem Yavu Barabanan Neu V'nach Nafshe, Mesoret B'bria Ki Chadam, B'machshavto Yachol L'chnia Goramim Nistarim Ba'olam Amaseu V'machshavto Hakala Tuchal Lifkom Gorim L'cheres L'charban Shel Geshmim Mutsakim Uchadamar Psachim and Bekevan the Nafesh Yivchayu Shota Ba'uena Bava Metziah Pei Dalet Amud Aleph Mistafe Mareh Mekomos. Says the Chazon Ish says, there they cast their eyes upon him and he died. And it's a tradition in creation that a person through his thought can set hidden forces in motion in the world of action, and with a light thought he can damage, causing destruction and ruin even of solid substances. Very metaphysical. As was taught in the Gemara Maseches Pesachim, Daf Nun Amud Beis Pesachim 50b, once their splendor increased, the eye had power over them. And in Bava Metziah, Pei Dalet Amud Aleph 84a, is the master not afraid of the Ein Abisha, the evil eye? V'sham base, and also an Amud base there. Greda achad yesh li b'nechem chulei, v'sham kav zayin Amud Aleph, lo tizbon ara dismicha lemata, v'teva b'nei adam mitpalim al miliot mugbelet, ma'amidim et miliot zo b'sakana, mikol makom, hakol b'dei shemayim v'chol shelo nigzar lecha b'din shemayim lehinazek v'davar nikar. Aval כשנגזר הדבר לעבד, מתגלגל הדבר לפעמים על ידי סיבת עין וחיסרון של הדבר ועל ידי זה הוא קלה. All right, so he brings these other examples, such as don't buy land that is adjacent to the city, because it's in human nature to be affected by limited abundance. They place this abundance in danger. All right. Person has limited abundance, they cast an Ayin Hara upon those that do have. Says, nevertheless, everything is in the hands of heaven, and unless it was decreed upon it in the judgment of Shemayim, in the judgment of heaven, to be harmed by a tangible matter, but when it was decreed that the matter be lost, sometimes the matter is brought about by means of the cause of an the deficiency of the thing, and through this it is destroyed. V'chadam Bava Metziah Kav Zayin Beit. The Rav Salik Levei Kivrei Chule, Tishin V'Tisha B'Ayin Ra'ah. As was taught in Bava Metziah, we saw that Rav went up to the cemetery, he said 99 died by the evil eye. ראינו כשנגזר לכן מיתה ביום הכיפורים חזדמן לפניהן עין רע שגלגלה מיתתן, וכאין דאמר מגילה ח"ח עמוד ב' וגרם עלי וכן רבי חייא בר יוסף כשהגיע זמנו להיפטר מן העולם ונגזר עליו זמנו גלגלו מן השמיים סיבת מותו על ידי הערת הממון בלב רבנן. Bring further examples. So we know the story of Rav went to the cemetery, said that 99 died by the evil eye. That is to say that when death was decreed upon them on Yom Kippur, an evil eye was presented before them, which brought about their death. Similar to what was said in Megillah Chav Ches Samad Beis 28b, that this and that caused it. And likewise, Rav Bar Yosef, when his time came to leave the world and his time was decreed upon him, from heaven they brought about the case of his death through the arousal of money in the heart of the rabbis. וכן חויב דריש בן רבי דריש לקיש ברכות ממב וייתכן דכל שאדם במעלה יתר כל סגולותיו וכוחותיו יתרות ואינו יותר פועלת והיינו דאמר ויבא ברבנן עיניהו ודאמר רבן שמעון גמליאל פרידה אחר חולי חישי דבלו דינה למייט עינש משום דסתן בקטרג בשעת הסכנה ואדם נידון בכל יום וגם בדין יום הכיפורים קובעים לפעמים להניחו אחרי טבח העולם ולא לשנות לו נס. It says, so was the incident of the son of Rav Shimon ben Rabbi, and it's possible that the greater the stature of the person, the greater all his qualities and powers, his eye is more effective, and this is what was said. The rabbis cast their eyes upon him. And when Shmuel Gamliel says, talking about the case of the mule, he held that without judgment a person doesn't die because the Satan prosecutes at a time of danger. A person is judged every day, and also in the judgment of Yom Kippur, they sometimes determine to leave him to the order of nature to not perform a miracle for him. So there's a very metaphysical explanation that the Chazon Ish gives here. And he says that it's scientific. It's one of the foundations of creation that a person can cause damage just by sight. That scientifically a person is able to look at something and the evil thoughts a person is thinking about something in a negative way is able to impact, even the physics of it. That one of the that this is just something embedded in creation. That a person's thoughts can affect changes even in solid physical things. When people are perplexed or astonished at something exceptionally successful, that good fortune is in danger of attack. However, everything he says is fixed from Shemayim, it's fixed from heaven, and if it was not so preordained, it cannot be caused by somebody's Ayin Hara. That heavenly decrees can be triggered in different ways, and if Ayin Hara causes revelation of somebody's shortcomings, that may activate a reduction in their entitlement. A simple thought expressed through one's eyes can cause terrible destruction even among things that are solid and physical. And this is one of the mechanisms that Hashem uses to carry out his din, his judgment in the world. And the Chazon Ish says the greater a person is, the greater would be the power contained within their eyes. So Chazon Ish understands Ayin Hara to be a destructive force of nature. And so exposing oneself to an Ayin Hara would be effectively like putting oneself into a Makom Sakana, place of danger. One of the Saidos Habriya, one of the secrets or foundations, really, one of the basis of creation is that people can affect things with their thoughts. And if there's a heavenly decree, a heavenly gezerah, and somebody to be damaged by something, the Ayin Hara might be the cause of that damage. So somehow observation, looking at something, it has an impact on that thing in a mystical sense. That this is a metaphysical explanation as to how this works. Because Avram Gorwitz Zatzal, he brings a similar idea from the Chovos of Avos. In Shar Bitachon Paragimel, the Chovos of Avos explains how Ayin Hara can affect us. That he notes the comments of Chovos of Avos that nobody can be harmed by another person unless God had determined that the person is going to be harmed already. And this ties into what the Chazon Ish was really saying, that the Ayin Hara can be basically a tool of divine justice in the world, of Hashem's din. וחמישי שם ביד אחד מחברים לכל את נפשו ולא להזיקה ולא לזולתו כי אם ברשות חברו יתברך. So the Chod of Levot says that the fifth principle is that no created being can benefit or harm either itself or any other creature without the permission of the Creator. Ki ha'eved כשיהיה לו יותר מאדון אחד ויהיה כל אחד מהם לכל לא ייתכן לא לפתוח על אחד מכם מפני שמקווה התועלת מכל אחד מכם, ואם יהיה אחד מכם יכול על תועלתו יותר משאריתם יהיה חוזק ביטחונו בו כפי יכולתו, אף על פי שהוא בוטח בשאריתם. If a slave has more than one master, and each one has the power to help him, it is not possible for him to put his trust in only one of them, since he hopes to benefit from each master. And if one master can benefit him more than the others, he should trust proportionally more in him, even though he also trusts in the others. אם לא יוכל לחילו חזיקו, כי אם אחד מכם בלבד או כורחו יבטח עליו לבדו, מפני שאינו מקווה תועלת מזולתו, והן כשירגיש האדם שלא יועילנו ולא יזיקנו אחד מהנבראים, אלא ברשות חברו יתברך ישוב ליבו מיראתם, ותקוותם ויבטח על חברו לבדו, כמו שנאמר, אל תבטחו בנדיבים בבין אדם שאין לו תשועה. And if only one of the masters can benefit him or harm him, certainly he should put his trust only on that master, since he does not hope for benefit from the other masters. Similarly, when a human being will realize that no created being can benefit him or harm him without the permission of the Creator, he will stop being afraid of them or of hoping for anything from them, and he will place his trust in the Creator alone. As it is written in Tehillim, put not your trust in princes nor in mortal man who has no help. Because Avram Gorwitz expounds on this. In Midot Amakav Samachdalit, he says, Zikra Ha'etza, Akor Midat Hakina, Nirei Al Yidei Chizuk Bisodot Chamuna V'Chabitachon. Says that the primary counsel for uprooting this trait of jealousy appears to be through strengthening the foundations of faith and trust. As we see in the Rambam's commentary to Pirkei Avot, במידות אלו שמוצאים את חדם מן העולם שכתב והוא כי באלה המידות או באחת מהן יפסיד אמונת התורה והכרח ולא יגיעו לא מעלות שכליות ולא מעלות חמידות עד כאן לשונו. We find in the Rambam's commentary to Pirkei Avos regarding these traits that remove a person from the world that he wrote that through these traits, or even through one of them, a person will necessarily lose faith in the Torah and he will not attain intellectual virtues nor virtues of character. המקנא מרוויח כלום לעצמו וגם לא מפסיד כלום למי שהוא מתקנא בו, אינו אלא מפסיד לעצמו, ולכאורה זריך בר בדבריו שהרי בוודאי עין רמז גדול, עין בבא בתרא בית עמוד בית, אסור לאדם לעמוד בשדה חברו בשעה שהיא עומדת בקמותיך, פרש רש"י שלא יזיק בעין חרא, ובבא מציע כף זין עמוד א' 99, מתו בעין חרא ואחד בדרך ארץ. Goes on to say that it seems to explain this based on what was said in Nesivos Olam, that jealousy is nothing but a lack of knowledge and foolishness, because the person who's jealous, he gains nothing for himself. Also, he does not cause any loss to the one he's jealous of, and he only causes loss to himself. very, very closely parroting, I think, what the Rabbeinu Yonah is saying. Although the Rabbeinu Yonah, I think, would agree that the person who you're jealous of is experiencing damage as a result of the Ayin Hara. Says that this requires clarification because we do see that the evil eye is a great harm. As we said, that it's forbidden for a person to stand near his friend's field at the time when it's standing in its stalks ready to be harvested, so that he not cause harm through the evil eye. And we see in Bava Metziah that 99 died from the evil eye, 1 through natural causes. The near the turrets, Shagam, ונראה לתרת שגם אם זה בגדר מזיק ואפילו חורג אבל הדברים מבורים על פי יסוד גדול בכובד הלבבות שלא שייך להחזיק או להרוג שום אדם אלא אם כן נגזר עליו ונמצא שבאמת לא הוא המפסיד והמזיק גם אם בדיני ממונות והלכות איסורין הוא מזיק אבל זה רק מצד חן הגדול וחיובו אבל בשורשו הכל מדוד ונקבע מן השמיים במשפט מדויק ואין רשות חברו קובע. מה יהיה עם זה, אלא נדמה על זה שזה בעל ידו. And it seems to answer that even if this is in the category of one who causes damage and even kills, it says, nevertheless, the matters are explained according to this great principle of Cholot HaLevavot, that it is not possible to harm or kill any person unless Hashem decreed it upon him. It follows that in truth he is not the one who causes the loss or the damage, even if in monetary law, according to Halacha, prohibitions, he's considered one who causes damage. This is only from the perspective of his conduct and his liability. It says, however, at its root, everything is measured and determined from heaven with precise judgment, and a fellow's wickedness does not determine what will be with this person, but he is held accountable for the fact that this came about through his hand. As such, Rav Gurwitz says that the way that Ayin Hara affects others is not as significant as the way that it affects the one who has it, as the one who's jealous. The person who's jealous destroys himself through his jealousy, and while the Ayin Hara causes damage to others, it is damage that would have happened anyway, just that it was brought about by this person's jealousy. Rav Dessler in Mechtav Meliyahu suggests that the mechanism through which Ayin Hara works is an ethical one, that the blessings bestowed by Hashem upon an individual should not serve as a source of anguish to others, that if one allows his wealth, his children, etc., to cause pain to others less fortunate, certainly one who flaunts his bounty, they arouse a divine judgment against himself and a reevaluation of whether he deserves those blessings. So Mechtab Me'eliyahu asks, Eich nitzadim me'ayin hara, how does one escape the evil eye? Yeshada mekaniv b'chavero mabit bo b'ayin hara, charei yizbarnu eich koyach ze shel ayin hara yachol l'chazik la'avero, aval hari le'dina b'lo dina, uvame Hashem b'chavero shemidat hadin pogat bo. When a person is jealous of his fellow and looks at him with an evil eye, we've explained how this power of the evil eye can harm his fellow. But there's no judgment without justice, so in what way is his fellow at fault that the attribute of justice strikes him? Barnu ashe yitachen shehu nitba b'midat chadim mipnei shehu garam b'mida mesuyemet v'rishon yikani bo harei baduk u'menuse hu shemi she'enu chai ba'ad atzmo klal v'hu notein v'lo notel v'chol inyanav ish kazeinu me'ora kina klal kein amru zichrono livracha al zar shel Yosef v'lo shalta be'ena bisho Dichti ben Prat Yosef ben Prat Ali Ayin Shelo Ratzta Lizon Mima Sheinu Shelo Ayin Ayin Ar Shalotet Bo. Says we then explain that it is possible that he is claimed upon by the attribute of justice because he caused to a certain extent the first one to be jealous of him. It's tested and proven that one who does not live for himself at all and who is a giver and not a taker in all matters, such a person does not arouse jealousy at all. Very interesting. That's how he defines very famous Mechtav Me'eliyahu. That's how he defines love. He says love is an act of giving without any expectation of taking, of receiving anything. Thus our sages of blessed memory said regarding the descendants of Yosef, the evil eye has no power over them, as it is written, Ben Prat Yosef. Yosef is a fruitful son, Ben Prat Oli Ayin, a fruitful son above the eye, an eye that did not wish to derive benefit from that which was not his.
The Ayin Hara will have no power over him. And some expounded from what it says, let them multiply abundantly in the midst of the land. Madagim shebayam mayim mechsim alechem ve'ein ayin hara shaletet bachem apsaro shel Yosef chulei sham. Dagim elu yesh bachem shnei inyanim heim mechsim min ayin ve'heim chayim keilu be'olam acher ve'einam mitcharim im yoshvei hayabasha klal. That just as fish in the sea are covered by the water and the evil eye has no power over them, so too the descendants of Yosef. These fish possess two qualities, that they're concealed from the eye, and they live as though in another world and do not compete at all with the inhabitants of the dry land. Chazal rotzim lelamed lanu b'zeshmi shechai samoi mina ayin u'shefotav chem legamrei achero me'elu shel charechlov einu marakina leolam, that the sages wish to teach us by this, that one who lives hidden from the eye and whose aspirations are entirely different from those of the street never arouses jealousy. So he says that one becomes wealthy, should be sure to do a mitzvah with some of his money to prevent an ayin hara from damaging it. And that if one causes his friend to become jealous of him, he's responsible and liable for the pain he causes him. And this could even cause him to ultimately lose his wealth. So a person should do mitzvahs to protect himself from difficulties. And this mechanism is rooted in the spiritual reality of all people being interconnected. Ayin hara means that one is jealous of another, is bothered by his very being, and therefore he wants only bad for him. And since all people's lives are mutually dependent on one another, it is possible that this will cause the successful person's life to be limited, and therefore more susceptible to injury or damage. So when somebody looks at his friend with jealousy, it causes God to examine the person with midat hadin, with the quality of strict judgment, because he caused somebody else to be jealous. Yosef was compared to fish because fish are covered by the water, but furthermore, they live a life that is different from everyone else, so nobody would be jealous of them. In the Divrei Shol of Rav Yosef Shol Nathanson, we have a similar approach, although a bit more esoteric. He says that the way the Ayin Hara works is that a person's jealousy causes God to re-examine whether the individual who is being looked at really deserves his lot. And with this idea, he explains why it is effective to say Ani Mizera Yosef to ward off the Ayin Hara. He notes that the Gemara says that fish are not subject to Ayin Hara, and suggests that this is because each limb of the fish has some independent life force. When something is dependent on a larger life force but deviates from the larger life force, they're subject to Ayin Hara because they're Yotzei Min HaKlal. They separate themselves from the common good. They have an individualism that runs amok of a realization that we're collectively interdependent on one another. All right. If somebody's independent, they're not Yotzei Min HaKlal. They're therefore not subject to scrutiny. When we emulate Yosef, we're not subject to the Ayin Hara, is the point he makes. So this is on Brachos Daf Chof. So says Sheiman Damar Dagim Shavim Emayim Echsimotan. Inyan Hadag Shenu near the Ayin Velo Yerushal Yosef Ein Ayin Hara Shalip Achem Hakavana Havir Ramat Chativi Hare Chacham Echad Kemo Rabbi Elazar Migermeza Shemer Dilkach Nimshlu Yisrael Hadagim Teva Hadagim Shaf Nechtach Mechem Charosh Nisachku Bin Chalim Umarim Bechol Makom Mareh Bechol Ever Ki Anefesh Ayin Heim Chachayot Vadai Klal V'Remez Ki Bechol Ever K'Vochin Yisrael Yesh Chayut Af Be'Varim Charuchakim Bechol Asher B'Shem Yisrael Echunu Yesh Bo Ruach Achiyuni Tov Ha'atzmi. Says they're the one who says the fish in the sea, the waters cover them. The matter of the fish were not visible to the eye, and upon which no Ayin Hara rests or rules. Regarding Yosef, no evil eye has dominion over them, the Jewish people. The intention is to remove the natural level. He says, one sage, like Rabbi Lezer Gemeza, said that for this reason, the Jewish people were likened to fish. It is in the nature of fish that even if their head is cut off and they swim in the streams, they display in every place of an appearance of vitality in every limb. But the soul and the eye are certainly the general vitality. And it is a hint that in every limb, likewise, Israel, the Jewish people, have vitality, even in the distant limbs. And whoever is called by the name Israel possesses with him a vital spirit and essential good. Zayani Omer Dechadein Arasholet Bishvil Dechol Inyan Ayin Hara Bishvil Shakol Hayarim Meklal. Tayat Teva Vav Bifratut Nimsacha Salo Chain Bichlal Yisrael Yesharim Vazadikim Vati Bazar Pasach Ubech Asur Lecha Yoshevet Beganim Shelo Lechiach Michal Shein Shain Ara Sholet Bazeh Ve'ain Beparshat Beshalach Bezohar V'sham Im Yesh Chayu Bechol Ever Az Ein Ayin Hara Sholet Ve'af Im Yashkiach Alav Bifratut Ulechach Nimshlu Zor Shel Yosef Ledagim. And according to this, I say that which the evil eye has no dominion is because the entire matter of the evil eye is due to the one who fears from the collective, and the inclination of nature rests upon him in particular. Thus, he is found lacking. Not so in the collective of Israel, upright and righteous. And it is written in the Zohar on the verse, "The companions listen to your voice, you who dwell in the gardens." That one should not rebuke her, from which it is implied that the evil eye has dominion in this. And we see in the portion of Beshalach in the Zohar there. He says, and there, if there's vitality in every limb, then the evil eye has no dominion, even if one looks upon him in particular. And so the descendants of Yosef are likened to fish. ולפי אני יודעתי מה שהדג כל עבר שבו יש בו חי דחו לפי שכל חיותם הוא מן המים ואם כל חלק שבו הוא במים תמיר או למין המים הוא מגבזי אמרו הדגים שווים המים מכסים אותם ואין עין הר שולט היינו דכל חלק הוא חי בפני עצמו כמו כן זרע של יוסף הבן בדברים כי עמוקים הם. Says, and according to my humble opinion, that which the fish, every limb in it has vitality, is because all their vitality is from the water. And if every part of it is in the water, it is hidden. But when it is brought up from the water, it's dead. And this is what they said. Just as the fish in the sea, the waters cover them, and the evil eye has no dominion. That is, that every part is the vitality unto itself. So too the seed of Yosef. And understand these matters because they're very deep. So, for the Divrei Shol, the point that he's making is that because each limb of the fish has some independent life force, when something is dependent on a larger life force but deviates from the larger life force, they're subject to Ayin Hara because they're Yotzei Min HaKlal. But if someone's independent, they aren't Yotzei Min HaKlal, they're not subject to scrutiny. And so when we're like Yosef, we're independent, we're not subject to the Ayin Hara. Now, the next source is somewhat of a more psychological one. And this is from Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik in Mishoy Hagrid Chadarom Chaveret Samach Aleph. So this is from the Rav Shiurim, is printed in Darom, in the journal Hadarom. So the Rav says that you have a lot of people who are sort of psychologically dependent on others for their sense of self. So you have a lot of people that, if you don't have people clapping behind them all the time, if they don't have people praising them, if they don't have sort of external validation, we would say, then they have a very poor sense of self. And so the Rav notes the difference between Ayin Ra and Ayin Hara. A person with Ayin Ra is stingy, they're not willing to help others. But a person with an Ayin Hara, they're focused specifically on worrying that other people live a better life than them. Many people live their life based on what other people think, and when they encounter somebody else with a similar attitude who looks down on them, it sort of quashes their sense of self and their creativity. They're negatively affected when other people don't value them. So when we're talking about the sense of independence that Yosef had, it's really to not worry about what other people think. Right? When Rabbi Yochanan said that he's a descendant of Yosef, and therefore the Ayin Hara had no power over him, he was basically saying that what it means to be a descendant of Yosef is not that we're like blood descendants per se, but rather that we inherited the trait, the quality of Yosef to not worry about what other people think. That those who know their own value without worrying about others are not subject to the Ayin Hara of others. Says the Rav Amar Rabbi Avahu, Al Tigrei Ale Ayin Ela Ole Ayin. Shem Meolim U Mesulakim Ma Shlitata Shel Ha'ayin. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina Abram Bechaye. The Yidgu L'Rod B'Kerev Haaretz. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina Hevi Riyah Chered Mevrechet Yaakov L'Ephraim U'Menashe. Amalek Agol Atimi Kol Vra. Rechet Chanim Vayikra B'Shem Shemi V'Shem Avotai Avram Yitzhak V'Yidgu L'Rod B'Kerev Haaretz. Madagim Shavim Mayim Echsin Aleichem Vein Ayin Hara Sholetet Bahem. Avsar Shel Yosef Vein Ayin Hara Sholetet Bahem V'Yi B'Ayet Ima. Yeshua Ayin Shel Yosef Shelo Ratzeta Lazun Mima Sheno Shelo. They should put the first Hara Ein Ayin Hara Sholetet Bo. Rabbi Bahu says, do not read Ale Ayin by a spring, rather Ole Ayin rising above the eye, that they're elevated and removed from the dominion of the eye. Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Chanina, says from there, and let them multiply abundantly in the midst of the earth. And Rabbi Yosef, son of Rabbi Chanina, brings another proof from Yaakov's blessing to Ephraim and Menashe. Right, Amalek Goelati, the angel who redeems me from all evil, bless the lads, let my name be called upon them in the name of my fathers Avram and Yitzhak, and let them multiply abundantly in the midst of the earth. Just as fish in the sea are covered by water and the evil eye has no power over them, so too the seed of Yosef, the evil eye has no power over them. And if you wish, say the Ayin Yosef that did not wish to derive benefit from that which was not his, from Potiphar's wife, the evil eye has no power over him. Lama Hishtamesha Hagamara Bevitoy Ayin Charevelu Bevitoy Ayin Ra. Ayin Ra Muvano Ayin Shal Adam Ra Aval Ayin Ra Muvano Ayin Shehi Ra. Umar Hebdel Benechem Hebdel Hu Sheha Bitoy Ayin Ra. Batayr Adam Shevshro Hu Adam Tov Lev Ela Shekashe Lo Lated Mishlo Lechar Hu Kamsan. Aval Bitoy Ayin Hara Mitayr Adam Asher Lehanat Atzmo Efshar Shehu Pazran Aval Sheno Zara Be'acher. So why does the Gemara use the expression Ayin Hara, not the expression bad eye? Ayin Hara, not Ayin Ra'a. So Ayin Hara means the eye of an evil person, but Ayin Ra'a means an eye that is bad. What is the difference between them? The difference is that the expression of Ayin Ra'a describes a person who may be kind-hearted, but they find it difficult to give of his own to another. He's stingy. But the expression evil eye, Ayin Hara, describes a person who, for his own enjoyment, might be generous, but whose eye is begrudging towards another. Ayin Hara bara meod etzli ki yesh anashim shehayechem tuluyim kulam bedat acherim shechem yaskimu imachem v'yishabechu otam v'yifaru otam אבל ברגע שמתגלה להם שאחרים לא מסכימים עוד עמכם ומבטלים אותם, מיד עובדים הם את כוחותיכם הנפשיים וביטחונם העצמי, כי בעולם היצירה בלימוד בהלכה ובאגדה, וכן בכל העניינים אפילו בשטח הרוחני, היצירה תלויה במצב של שמחת היוצר, ורק בשמחה ובביטחון שכאשר היצר נמצא אצלו וכוחו לבצע את המעשה, ואז המעשה יוצא יפה, ובזמן שכאשר היצירה חסר ולא נמצא עוד ביטחון עצמי, אין דבר נעשה כחוגים, כי אנשים כאלו רואים את עצמם רק במראה של אחרים, אינם מכירים בכוחותיהם עצמיים, ואנשים כאלו עין הרע הוא נורא, כי בזמן שאדם גם מביט עליהם עין הרע, זאת אומרת בניגוד, בחומרה ובאי הסכמה מיד נפסלת אישיותם ועובדת לגמרי. The matter of the evil eye is very clear to me, for there are people whose lives depend entirely upon the opinions of others, says the Rav, that others agree with them, praise them, and glorify them. But the moment it is revealed to them that others no longer agree with them and dismiss them, they immediately lose their emotional strength and their self-confidence. When the world of creativity and the study of Halacha and Agadah, both branches of Torah, and likewise in all matters, even in the spiritual realm, creativity depends on the state of the joy of the Creator. And not only on joy, but on the confidence that the capacity for creativity is within him, that he has the power to carry out the act, and then the act emerges well. The Rav continues and says, but when the capacity for creativity is lacking and self-confidence is no longer present, the matter is not done properly, for such people see themselves only in the mirror of others and do not recognize their own inner powers. And for such people, the evil eye is dreadful. When a person looks at them with an evil eye, that is, with opposition, severity, and disapproval, their personality is immediately disqualified and completely lost. Zot hayta kavanat Rabbi Yochanan b'amro ana mazra'ah shel Yosef ketena, lav davka shehayta lo kabbalah shua migiz Yosef ele shebifrat zeh hu dome lYosef, ki Yosef yedat kochatav hapnimim, shechayu yidoyim lo mitoch hakarat tzmid v'lo mitoch mara shel acherim, ki yilulei hikir et kochotav mitoch haracha shel acherim, שבמקרה זה הייתה הערכה אחיו, לא היה יוסף מגיע לכלום והיה מפסיק מיד את חלומותיו. So this was the intention of Rabbi Yochanan when he said, I come from the seed of Yosef. Not necessarily that he had a tradition that he was from the Yichus of Yosef, but that in this respect he was similar to Yosef. Yosef knew his inner powers, which were known to him through self-recognition, not through the mirror of others. He recognized if he had recognized his powers only through the estimation of others, which in that case was the estimation of his brothers, then he wouldn't have achieved anything, and he would have immediately seized his dreams. And the Rav says that Ayin Hara to him is crystal clear. The Rav says that you have people whose lives are entirely dependent on what others approve of them or praise them or forget about them. And at the moment that they realize that others no longer approve of them or care about them, that destroys them. And people like this see themselves exclusively from the perspective of others without recognizing their independent abilities. And for people like this, the Ayin Hara can be devastating. When others gaze upon them with an Ayin Hara, meaning some degree of opposition or disapproval, their very humanity can be completely destroyed. And this is the meaning of Rabbi Yochanan when he said, I am from the offspring of Yosef. So it's not about destroying, it's not about waves that are emitted, it's not about something pegged at observation, says the Rav. The Rav says that it's when you look at somebody and you're not Machshava that person, you don't think that that person is deserving of what they need or what they have. You undermine them. You undermine their personality because their personality is dependent on others. And most people, in fact, are dependent in some degree of what people, we are dependent to some degree of what people think about us. And when you're undermining, you look at them in that way, and in one glance, you know, somebody looks at you like this and they say, you know, you made a major achievement. And somebody walks in and you could just see from their eyes that they don't think you deserve it. So, you know, you've destroyed that person. Their whole existence, their whole sense of self falls apart. And we see on the one hand, like the Chazon Ish, it's a real metaphysical thing. And Rav Soloveitchik says the point is that you're undermining somebody. You're undermining their sense, their self-sense of existence, which is why, says Rav Soloveitchik, how is that you escape it? You look back at Yosef. Yosef Tzaddik was Olei Ayin. He is the person who escaped the Ayin Hara. He escaped it by dreaming. He rose above it. Right? So Yosef had the worst possible life in the sense that he was sold into slavery. He kept dreaming because his sense of self was independent of anybody else's. He was Yosef because Yosef was Yosef. It didn't depend on whether his brothers supported him or not. He was all ayin. He didn't let the ayin of others impact him. And that's what we say when a person says, I want to escape the ayin hara, says Rav Soloveitch. We look at Yosef as the model because he was independent of other people's accreditation or not. So we see these different psychological, metaphysical, mystical sort of aspects of it. The second part of the final part of the shiur, I want to look at some practical halachic aspects to this. So we'll deal with aliyos, calling up people to the Toras. So generally, from the letter of the law, you can call two relatives up to the Torah for an aliyah one after the other. That applies whether they're brothers, a father and son, two brothers or a father and a son, but we commonly do not do that because of ayin hara. So Rav Aaron HaKoyni Lunyu Liorchas Chaim in Halacha Sheni V'Chamishi Siman Chavav, he discusses whether it is permissible to have two brothers receive aliyahs back to back. He rejects the view that maybe it's like a form of edus, like a form of bearing testimony, right? So you can't accept two brothers as, if you need two witnesses, two edim, the two edim can't be related to each other. He says that we reject that, like like you're having a form of false testimony to Hashem giving the Torah if you have two brothers back and back. But he rejects that we should call up two brothers back to back because that would be a problem of ayin hara. Katav Rabbeinu Moshe Nesiat Avon Yochalim Beit Achim. Likrat Torah b'zeh achar zeh v'Rabbeinu achar ha'av ve'ein menichim lasot ela b'shvil ayin hara. V'yesh omrim de'in lachem likrot zeh achar zeh she'em pesulim leidut zeh lezeh u'chativ edut Hashem ne'mana. It says that Rabbeinu Moshe wrote that two brothers they should be able to be called up to the Torah one after the other, and likewise the son after his father. But we don't allow this to be done because of the evil line. Since there are those who say that they shouldn't read one after the other because they're disqualified from giving testimony for one another. As it is written about the Torah, Edus Hashem Ne'emana, the testimony of God is faithful. The Maharil notes this issue as well and writes that it even applies when one brother gets a regular aliyah and one brother receives the maftir. Maral hikpid al chomed the maftir b'Shabbat v'chamiv kavar karabat Torah mishum ein abisha. That Maharal was particular regarding one who stands for the maftir on Shabbat when his father-in-law has already read from the Torah because of the evil eye. And so the Shulchan Aruch in Orchaim Kuf Mem Aleph Sivav 141.6, he says, Yecholim Nikrod Beit Achim Zeh Achar Zeh V'ben Achar Ha'av Ein Manichin Ele B'Shvil Ayin Hara, that two siblings may be called up for aliyahs one after the other, and so to a father after a parent. We don't allow it because of ayin hara. Says the Rambam, Efilu im echad hu hashvi ve'echad hu hamaftir lo yikro hasheni bishmo mishum ayin hara. And even if one was called up for the seventh aliyah and one was called up for maftir after him, the second one shouldn't be called up with that person's name because of ayin hara. So Shulchan Aruch codifies the words of the Orchos Chaim. The Ramah codifies the Maharil's comments about Maftir and adds the few important words of Lo Yikro Sheni B'Shmo, implying that the issue only applies because we call up the maftir by name. Mishnah brings up some interesting halachas. So it says, really, according to the strict law, there's no problem here. And if you called him up and he already went up, he shouldn't come down. But initially, you shouldn't call them up because of the ayin hara. Yishulayin haravein nafka mina bazeh ben achiv mina av o mina aim ve'afilu mishein makbidim alayin hara v'yesh shemachmir nefilu av im ben beno mishum ein abisha uvimkon tzarech yesh latir im ben beno. Doesn't matter if they're brothers by the father or from the mother. Even if people say that they're not particular on the evil eye, there are those who are machmir even with the father and his son's son, father and a grandson, even because of the evil eye. But he says in a place where you have to call up a grandfather and then a grandson, you could do it. זה אחרי זה כיוון דין מפסק אחר בינתיים. דווקא בשבת שאינו אבל ספר תורה אחר למפטיר, אבל אם לא יצין ספר תורה אחר בוטו וכן אם המפטיר אינו בר מצווה דיין מותר. That is to say, even though they interrupt with Kaddish in between, nevertheless it is considered one after the other since no other person interrupts between them. Specifically on Shabbos, when another Torah scroll is not brought out for the maftir. He says, but if you have another Torah scroll taken out, like on Yonah, let's say, then it would be allowed. Or if the maftir is not yet bar mitzvah age, that's permitted. Is all right, Bishmo. The puke makum shenogim shelu yikrot the maftir bishmo rak stam yamod maftir kevan shein korin et shmo motor filo shnei achim ze achar ze o avu beno v'davka b'makum shenogim kein avalish l'shanot bein kein b'makom shenogim yikrot b'shem lo yasu guf guvavoy. Heker tafi v'chein minhag shelo likrot b'shem hu b'shinoi motor likrotan b'shishu shavi. Says this excludes a place where the custom is not to call the maftir by name, but they only say Yamod maftir, let the maftir stand. Since his name is not called, it is permitted even for two brothers, one after the other, a father and his son. And this is specifically in a place where that is the custom. But to change this in a place where the custom is to call by name, they shouldn't do so, because the practice itself constitutes a greater distinction. And he says, likewise, if the custom not to call by name involves some change, it's permitted to call them for the 6th and 7th. So basically, if you had a case where you mistakenly did call up the two relatives, the second one should get the aliyah when he's been called up, but the first family member should get off the beam and not stand there like we customarily do. If you do have a second Torah taken out for the maftir, such as on Yontif, then the maftir can be a relative of the previous aliyah. Not worried for Ayin Hara in that case. There are places that don't call up the maftir by name, and in those places you can call up relatives. But if the minhag is to call up the maftir by name, you can't leave it out because then it'll draw even more attention, which is what we're looking to avoid. The Seif Al Yerabah explains how Ayin Hara works in this case of consecutive aliyahs. So Zayin Zayin Maftir Kolidavka Ke Maftir Bar Mitzvah Shabbat She'ein Korin Maftir B'Sefer Torah Cheret Hu Doser Shar Kesuv Now Mashe Katuv Rama V'Levush Yikra Bishmo Kuli Mashma Shekorim Maftir Stam Motav Venirali Dugabim Kamod Shekorim Lifamim Yamod Maftir Stam Yari Avalke She'ein Derech Kain Im Kain Milta Dikmea V'Shali Yanashe Vika Eina Bisha so he says specifically regarding the case when the maftir is a bar mitzvah, and on Shabbos when they don't read the maftir from another Torah scroll, it is forbidden, as the Ramah says. And he says, and that what the Raman Lavush said, that they should not call him by his name, implies that when one simply reads the maftir, it is permitted. And it seems to me that this refers specifically to places where they sometimes call Yamod Maftir without specifying a name. But where this is not the custom, then it becomes a matter of wonder and people ask about it. And then you have more of a concern of the evil eye. So it would seem that the issue is drawing attention to something unusual, which in turn would arouse jealousy. Two family members receive aliyahs one after the other. It's somewhat unusual, and people start to ask, why does that family get so many aliyahs? And similarly, if one changes the minhag of how somebody is called up, that also draws attention. This is also a reason why two couples shouldn't share the brachos at a wedding, because it's something unusual that causes others to be jealous. Right? Another case, the Maimonides discusses Ayin Hara regarding two couples who get married on the same day. So theoretically, according to the letter of the law, you could say one set of brachos for both couples, but we don't do that because of Ayin Hara. So the Maimonides in Hilchot Yudal says, "V'roi chayli shnei chatanim lehipater bivracha achad kemo sheniftaru b'suda bechada birkat sheva bracha lule mipnei Ayin Hara." And it would have been appropriate for two grooms to be dismissed with one blessing, just as they were dismissed at the meal with one blessing of the Sheva Brachot, of the 7 wedding blessings, were it not because of the evil eye. In Even Ezer Siman Samach Beis Seif Gimel, the Ramah says, "Im yesh shnei chatanim yachad mevarchim birkat chatanim achat lishnechem." If there are two grooms together, we make the birkat chatanim once for both of them. It's the Machshava. But the Ramah says we don't do that. Ve'afilu lo chayu chatanim beyachad elu shechayat datal shneihem kemo shenit ba'er b'rdei siman reish samachay. In Mila v'yesh de'in levarech lishnei chatanim beyachad mishum ayin hara, bringing the Hagach Maimonides. V'chein noigin laso l'chol echad chuppah v'nei atzmo ulevarech l'chol echad aval le'achar hasuda mevarchin l'harbe chatanim b'yachadim achlu b'yachad. And even if the groom were not together, but his mind was on both of them, and some say not to make the bracha for two grooms together because of Ayin Hara. And similarly, says the Rambam, we have the practice to make a separate chuppah for each one and to make the bracha for each one. But after the meal, he says we can make the bracha for many grooms together if they ate together. Some practical halachic applications. Now, what are things that we could actually do to help? So I'm going to start with what would perhaps seem to be borderline avodas or borderline idolatrous, but it is an idea brought in a couple of sources, and perhaps you've seen this, the red bundle, the red bracelet. So Divrei Torah base Ayin Aleph, Rav Chaim Elazar Shapir, the Munkach Rav, notices the practice of many to tie a red string to protect from Ayin Hara. Kesava kanir sheyesh bo mishum gil kemishos befiu k'nei mimenu shemarei adom. Hu mesugal neged Ayin Hara v'yesh l'mish zehu kemo shekatav belacha shlichish chuto l'chim b'shem ha'galil shebo shem ha'gavora Rashi Tevo Yachsa Gibor Le'Olam Yifrach Ka'nodach Yinu Al Yedei Ha'gavorot Overemez She'yie Ve'yitpardu Ha'klipot Ve'yifreshu. That he holds apparently that there is within this an aspect of gil, like one who assists with the mouth, and acquire from it that the red string, the red appearance, is effective against the evil eye. And it may be said that this is as it is written regarding a whispered incantation, whispering over the thread, directing it with the name Hagalil, in which there's the name of Gavora, an acronym God will shelter the mighty one who flourish forever as it is known. So that is by means of Hashem's Gevurot. It's a hint that the klipot, that the evil sparks, will separate and disperse. It's Kabbalistic. The Teshuvah Vayan David Gimel and Dalet says it's possible that the purpose of the red string is to cause a distraction. When people tie it to their wrists or in a baby carriage, the goal is for the onlooker to look at the string rather than the person and prevent them from being jealous. עוד יש לדוני אי חחות חסגולה די שהבינו העניין שטבע העין להסתכל על צבא האדום וממילא אין העין להסתכל על יופי התינוק וזה רק לאותן שקושרים חחות בגלוי או על מקומות מכוסים. שוב נודעתי שכדי קליפה אדמו"ר מפתפורס שליטה מצווה לקשור חוט אדום ונראה שכן קיבל מרבותיו ומסריו שוב ראיתי בשאלות ותשובות בר משה שהמנהג ומתיר. That there is further discussion whether the thread is a segula, for there are those who understood the matter as follows. That the nature of the eye is to look at the color red, and consequently the eye does not look at the beauty of the baby. And this applies only to those who tie the thread openly, not in places that are covered. And he reports that this is how the Admor of Petvarsk instructs how to tie a red thread. And that the Shelos and Shuvas Ber Moshe, which is a very respected book of Shelos and Shuvas, Moshe Stern, Debrecen, he brings the custom and allows it. All right, so this is one approach. It is borderline avodah zarah. Actually, the Tosefta and Shabbos does mention that this might be Darchei Mori. More practically, the Gemara gives us some very tangible advice. That one of the best ways to protect oneself from spiritual harms is to not give them much attention. Because the more focus we place on something, the more influence it'll have over us. And by not dwelling on negative energies or spiritual dangers, we limit their power and prevent them from taking hold. The Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Chuf Yud Amud Beis 110b says, Klala de Milta Kol de Kafed Kafedi Bechade, Udela Kafed La Kafedi Behade, Umichu Lemechash Mibei. That the rule of the matter is that all who are particular, these spiritual forces will be particular with him. And if one is not particular, they are not particular with him. Nevertheless, one should still be careful with these things. And Reb Moshe, Igros Moshe ben Ezra, Chelik Gimel Chavav, makes a similar point. He says, Inyan Ayin Hara, ודאי יש לחוש אבל אין להקפיד הרבה, כי בדברים כאלו הכלל מן דלקיפד, להקפדינן בחדיה, כי דמצינו בזוגות דפסחים דף חופיות, אבל אין רואה בזה שאישה זירה שחו כדרך העולם לכי דבר שיהיה שייך עין הרע ואין להקפיד בזה. He says about this Reb Moshe, about the matter of the evil eye, certainly there is reason for concern, but one should not be overly particular about it. Because in such matters, the principle is that one who is not particular about it, we're not particular with him. As we see in our Gemara in Pesachim regarding zugos, pairs. He says, I do not see in this that a young woman who's becoming pregnant as the way of the world would be subject to an evil eye, and one doesn't have to be particular about this. haRamban vechameiri vade lo yafalgu ala gamar bidvarim shechosheshin v'ayin hara aval ein lahakpid kol kach v'gam rak b'davar shalom matzoi lefi derech haolam shayach lachush v'lo lidvarim mitzuvim. And regarding the words of the Rambam in the Meiri, says Reb Moshe, certainly they would not dispute the Gemara concerning matters in which there is concern for the evil eye, but one should not be so particular. And it applies only to something that is not common according to the way of the world, that there is room for concern, but not to things that are common. So this, again, is a very halachic approach, what Reb Moshe is saying. It ties in, and it's learned basically from what we see in Mishna and those other sources regarding how Ayin Hara works in the context of calling people up to the Torah, like what the Eliyah Rabbah says. It's when things, sort of deviate from the normal way of the world, from the Minhag Olam, that's when, the Ayin Hara could be aroused. So we avoid those things. The Gemara itself, like, don't put yourself in the position, plant your field away from the city. do things according to the normal way. Don't arouse the attention you don't want, and we won't have to worry about it. So ignoring it is a very good strategy because very often the more we struggle against things, the bigger it seems, the greater the problem becomes. By ignoring it, we weaken its influence, we prevent it from causing harm. Our anxieties and fears can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we constantly worry, we act in ways that make negative outcomes more likely. Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And the same applies to the Ayin Hara. Giving it too much influence or significance only gives it power. If we approach life with trust and a good outlook, then negativity will not have hold over us, we hope. So this concept of the evil eye, it shows us that by acting modestly and sensitively, we could protect ourselves from negative forces. How we see others and ourselves, it has real impact. The thoughts and attitudes we project can shape our lives and influence those around us. And thinking positively, bestowing blessings upon others, creates good energy around us, positively affects the people we interact with. Thinking good thoughts doesn't only help others, it also helps us by enriching our lives. Wishing everybody a good Shabbos, and we look forward to seeing you in Shul tomorrow.